Behind the closed doors of Beijing, something extraordinary was said. The most powerful man in China told the most powerful man in America that the man arriving next week to see him, Vladimir Putin, may one day regret the war he started. Xi Jinping has never said this out loud, not to Biden, not to anyone. Are the cracks in the Moscow alliance starting to show? When Xi Jinping and Donald Trump sat down in Beijing last week, the conversation apparently went places that neither government has been willing to confirm, including a remarkable assessment by the Chinese president that Vladimir Putin might one day regret invading Ukraine. According to several people familiar with the US reading of the summit, Xi made the comments during wide-ranging talks on May 15th. It is a notable shift. People familiar with Xi's meetings with former President Joe Biden say the Chinese leader never offered a personal judgment on Putin or the war, even in private. Those conversations were described as frank, but stopped well short of any verdict on Russia's decision to invade. The timing is hard to ignore. Putin is due in Beijing on May 20th for his own summit with Xi, arriving just days after the Chinese leader hosted Trump, and 25 years after Russia and China signed their landmark friendship treaty. Xi's reported remarks come as the war grinds through its fifth year with no end in sight. Ukraine has proven increasingly effective with long-range drone strikes, hitting targets near Moscow as recently as May 18th. Zelensky called those strikes entirely justified, coming days after Russia launched what Ukraine described as a record aerial assault on Kyiv. A Philadelphia congressman and senior Democrat on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly put the battlefield shift plainly.
The brave Ukrainians have reinvented warfare in much the same way the First World War reinvented warfare for the 21st century. Drone warfare has now become the norm and is revolutionizing the way we wage war.
There was a second thread to the Beijing talks that has drawn less attention but carries its own weight. Trump reportedly suggested during the summit that the United States, China, and Russia should work together against the International Criminal Court, telling Xi their interests were aligned on the matter. Whether Xi genuinely believes Putin is heading toward regret, or whether the comment was something more diplomatic, is impossible to know from the outside. What is clear is that something was said in that room that neither side wants on the record. As Russian forces continue to pound Ukraine, Moscow has introduced a new law that could dramatically widen President Vladimir Putin's military powers beyond the battlefield. On May 13th, the Russian parliament approved a bill granting Putin the authority to deploy troops into foreign countries under the pretext of protecting Russian citizens abroad. According to the State Duma documents, the bill was drafted to protect the rights of Russian citizens in the event of their arrest, detention, criminal prosecution, or other prosecution pursuant to decisions of foreign courts vested with criminal jurisdiction by other foreign states without Russia's participation. Putin has 14 days to sign the bill into law. Defending the bill, State Duma chairman Vyacheslav Volodin accused Western nations of turning international justice into a repressive machine aimed at punishing those who oppose European political interests.
Western justice has turned into a repressive machine for dealing with those who disagree with the decisions imposed by European officials. In these circumstances, it is important to do everything to ensure that our citizens abroad are protected.
Ukraine has blasted the legislation as another sign of Moscow's growing expansionist ambitions, warning that the Kremlin is openly turning military aggression into official state policy.
This decision can be described in two words: aggressive lawlessness. By granting himself the unlimited right to use Russian occupation forces outside the country under the pretext of supposedly protecting Russian citizens, Putin is effectively admitting that aggression has become the norm of Russian state policy.
Moscow has previously justified its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. by claiming that it was protecting Russian-speaking regions of the country, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. Russia still demands the reinstatement of the Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine as part of any peace agreement. This year, various European intelligence agencies have labeled Russia as a direct threat to NATO and the West. Officials from the European Union have expressed concern that Putin will initiate a conflict with Europe within the next year or two to test the United States' commitment to NATO. At the same time, the Pentagon has cancelled plans to temporarily deploy 4,000 US-based troops to Poland. The decision, first reported by Army Times, came just 2 weeks after the Pentagon announced it was withdrawing 5,000 troops from NATO ally Germany, in part due to a widening rift over the Iran war between US President Donald Trump and Europe. Moscow's continued missile and drone assaults on Ukraine have already seen Russian weapons breach NATO territory, driving European states to ramp up their defense capabilities in response. Last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that the Baltic countries might become Moscow's next target if Ukraine doesn't get enough support. Moscow itself has issued numerous threats to Europe since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In December last year, Putin said Russia is ready to fight a war with Europe if provoked in his latest threat against the West.
Мы не собираемся воевать с Европой, я уже об этом 100 раз сказал. Но если Европа вдруг захочет с нами воевать и начнет, мы готовы прямо сейчас. Здесь не может быть никаких сомнений. Только вопрос в чем? Если Европа вдруг начнет с нами войну, мне кажется, что очень быстро, это же не Украина. С Украиной мы там действуем хирургическим способом, аккуратненько, так? Чтобы, понятно, да? Это не война в прямом современном смысле этого слова. Если Европа вдруг захочет начать с нами войну и начнет ее, то очень может быстро произойти ситуация, при которой нам не с кем будет договариваться.
With the war in Ukraine showing no signs of slowing down even in its 5th year, the new legislation is likely to deepen fears across Europe that the Kremlin is preparing for a broader and more confrontational foreign policy.